Hey everyone, before we get going here, I just want to point out that this video is current as of patch 1.181.202 in the corner there. And I just want to point out things are constantly changing. This game's a bit crazy right now being in beta. Anyway, let's get going. Welcome everyone to an episode of Basic Engineering. I'm your host, Lost Fighter. Anyway, this is going into the steps assuming you have absolutely no idea what the heck you're doing. And so why don't we kind of jump in here. This is the main screen, of course. You're going to see a couple things like latest bug fixes here on the right. You're going to see the current patch on the bottom right. Now, say you want to get into a game. I recommend learning in creative first, because this is somewhat of a complex game just to start with survival. It is not your ordinary Minecraft style game. So if we were to go into a new game, we'd want to go into custom, and there's a bunch of different options here. I recommend the star system. That's kind of, in my opinion, the way Space Engineers was meant to be played. All these other options, they give you a ton of different things, but if we're going to be doing creative, we're going to want to go with the star system. Now, one thing to keep in mind, because this is confusing, and this is as of a later patch, but the new UI is somewhat confusing to the fact of, are we in creative or are we in survival right now? Because you can actually click some options and it'll just flick on over. Now, the lighter colored one actually denotes what we are working with here. So if we click that, we are now in creative. Sound mode, we've got realistic and arcade. Realistic basically is if you're in space, you're not going to be able to hear sounds as easily unless like you're within a pressurized room. Whereas if you're in arcade, you can still hear things like gunshots, grinding, and welding, and all that fun stuff. You're not going to hear it like through your suit. You're going to hear it as if there was atmosphere around you. Now, in the online mode, you can choose different things. This is pretty self-explanatory. Then, environmental hostility has to do with asteroids, or meteorites more specifically. I guess it kind of depends on where you're at. But you can control like the amount that you get Armageddon, and you're going to be praying to Bruce Willis for help for there. But when it comes to safe, that seems to be the preferred play style, because a lot of saves actually go corrupt really quickly. Some later patches have been released, and meteorites and asteroids aren't quite as bad nowadays as they used to be, where they would just like snipe your one block in the middle of nowhere. If you're doing single player, block limits don't really matter. You can turn those off. You can leave it on. I think the limit's right around 10,000 blocks. Autosaves are wonderful. Other than that, mods. If you want to know what are good mods and whatnot, you can always check the Steam store and all that fun stuff by going up to the workshop, and they've always got tons of great items on there. Now, if we want to really get into it, let's go into advanced. Again, this is going to be one of those things you're going to have to play with throughout here and figure out stuff. But just for starting purposes, I recommend turning off drones, spiders, and wolves. Just because these three, you're going to have one heck of a day if you're playing in survival. Now, if you're all good with everything here, I do recommend turning on air tightness, as you're going to play with pressurization. And an error will pop up saying basically this could cause a server to destabilize. But again, we're not really too worried about it. And playing on servers, it really doesn't have that much of impact on the server. So if you're okay with everything here, you click OK. You click OK, and then the game will start. However, I've got a pre-made save I would like to show you all, so why don't we hop right on in. Okay, so now that we've loaded up the save here, this is a base that I pre-built just to show everyone how we're going to be building things in the future. Anyway, so this is a mining ship I use. Its basic function is to mine a large amount of minerals and materials and what have you and bring it back to the base here. Some of the features include that it has a live TV screen planted right in front of where a camera would shine. So if you get stuck in a tunnel, you can actually see a little bit in third person with that, as well as you can see the material intake, like there's 13K in here currently. Now, I'm not expecting anyone to build like this right away, so we gotta kind of focus on the basics. And I think one of the biggest things to understanding how ships work is understanding how cargo and the tubing system works. First off, I want to point out anything with one of these yellow hatch points right here. This is where tubing can connect to. However, there are two types of tubes, and we cannot confuse that. So, to properly recognize the difference between a conveyor tube and a cargo container is to be able to recognize the type of tubes. Now, conveyors generally are solid yellow here, and when you walk up to it, you don't really get any kind of silhouette around it, whereas if you go up to anything that can hold any kind of cargo or minerals or anything, you'll see a yellow silhouette in which you can interact with that with T or the action key rather, so like K or I, and you can kind of look through and see different things. How you know this is correctly connected is you have to match the connector size. There are small conveyor tubes and then there are large ones here. Now these are junctions, and if we remember back with some of the building blocks, if you've played with that at all, you will notice that if there's a little plus next to it, that means it comes in different shapes. Well, the same is with conveyor tubes as well. Now, how to tell that they are connected correctly is that they will appear green and they have a power source such as a battery, a reactor, or some other source. Now, there are two different sizes here, as I mentioned. If you bring it to the opening port of one of the large conveyors with one of the small, it will not connect. So keep that in mind. Now, some things will not transfer through small cargo conveyor tubes, such as missiles. Components generally will not go through. Smaller things such as ore, raw ore, and ingots can get passed through. Ammo for guns can. Now, with that stated in mind here, this ship is meant for mining, so ore can go through the small conveyor tubes like that. And back here we have some conveyor systems, but in the very rear here, it's covered by armor and covered in everything, but there are actually two large cargo containers in the rear there. And then we have connector ports here. These are made to connect to other connection hubs in which you can actually drain your materials after a run. Now, you'll have to experiment with it. Ships are going to require a few things. And some of these things are going to be thrusters, obviously. So we're going to have ion, hydrogen, and atmospheric. They're pretty self-explanatory. Hydrogen can work in both space and atmosphere. Ion can only work effectively in outer space. Now, for atmospheric, they do work well on the planets. However, different planets have different air thickness and all that. So you're going to have to play around with that, with figuring out how much power you want in your ship. If you're using hydrogen, you don't nearly need as much power. However, atmospheric and ion thrusters are very, very energy intensive, hence why, if you can tell, I have 4 different reactors for this ship. Now let's take her outside real quick. So, with this ship right here, some of the things you will need for it is you will need a cockpit, you'll need an ore detector, you'll need a power source. So in this case we have reactors, we have thrusters, we have the entire, I like to call it tubing, but conveyor system, and we have a couple other components, but those are just some of the few that are necessary to it. To get into this, you go up to the cargo or the cockpit, press your action key, which is generally F. Now you can view things in third person with the V key if you're not familiar with the controls. However, keep in mind whatever features you throw into your ship and whatever blocks, it does add mass, it does add weight, and it will actually draw from your ability to accelerate and slow down. Keep it simple in the start and you will eventually be building like this. Thank you for joining me in basic engineering, and we will go into more advanced concepts in the next video. Thank you.